Okay. All right. What up, everyone? YouTube, Facebook, Periscope, everyone who's watching. Thank you for rocking with me again. I kind of want to just take maybe like 10 to 15 minutes to discuss the Georgia election law because there've been a lot of comments about saying that this is a super racist law. This is like Jim Crow 2.0. Joe Biden gave some remarks recently saying that, what's going on is an attack on black people and black voters. And I kind of want to just discuss the law and whether or not this is actually racist legislation, right? Now, here's the thing. Before I proceed, I'm I'm going to acknowledge something here, which is the Republicans are passing this election law for one reason only. It's because they want to ensure that Georgia goes back to being a red state moving forward. And so, to a certain extent, I'm kind of acceding to critics of this new election law that yes, the reason Republicans are uh, passing these new legislation laws, and not just Georgia, but I'm sure other states will follow, is because they want to dissuade and decrease voters who are not going to vote Republican from voting. Point blank, period. Right? That is true. That said, that is very different than calling this piece of legislation racist legislation, or stating that this law in particular is innately racist or some kind of Jim Crow 2.0. I think that's ridiculous. So I found an article here. I'm going to go ahead and pull this up, share my screen. And I was searching for an article that would be, kind of nonpartisan, down the middle here, as you can see. And I want to read you the highlights of the law, and we're going to discuss certain points, right? After I just read through all of them, right? So it says here, requires an ID number, like a driver's license, to apply for an absentee ballot. Cuts off absentee ballot applications 11 days before an election. Limits the number of absentee ballot drop boxes. Allows the state to take control of what it calls, quote, underperforming local election systems. Disallows volunteers from giving away food and drink to voters waiting in lines. Revises times for advanced voting. Allows election officials to begin scanning verified ballots on the third Monday before election day. Requires 2 Saturday voting days and makes 2 Sunday voting days optional. Revises times for runoffs to be held on the 28th day after a general or special primary election. Now, for this specific bill in particular, if we're being honest here, hold on, let me go back to here. Okay, so if we're being honest here, the ID portion is what is being called racist, and also the fact that only poll workers can pass out food and drinks to voters waiting in long lines, right? Yeah, the drop boxes stuff and all that stuff, but really a lot of the commentary that I've seen has been directed towards the photo ID and the not being able to pass out foods and drinks to voters standing in line. And a couple of things here. Now, photo ID for voting to me isn't inherently racist for a couple of reasons. Number one, in 2021, you kind of can't live in society today with and not have an ID. You need an ID if you want to buy cigarettes. You need an ID if you want to buy alcohol. You need an ID in New York City where I live. In order for me to get my college ID, I need a state ID. So you need an ID for that. You need identification to drive. There are so many areas in your life where you need an ID. Where I don't know how you can necessarily say that a state that is requiring its citizens to have an ID in order to vote, which is extremely important, which has severe consequences. I don't think that can be viewed as inherently racist, especially because there's nothing stopping African Americans from going and getting an ID. Most of you should have an ID anyway. Now, the libertarian side of this argument and discussion would be, well, yes, well, look, we've been voting for years without state IDs. The founders didn't envision that, hey, we all need to be able to identify ourselves if we're going to vote, which is, look, a persuasive argument from the libertarian perspective. But to me, it still doesn't make this bill inherently racist. Now, I already acknowledge they're doing this because they want to dissuade black voters from going to the polls. But to me, that has more to do with us than it does with them. Because if you're telling me that you as an African American cannot go ahead and say, well, you know what? I don't have an ID. I want to vote. I'm going to go to the DMV and get me an ID. If you can't do that, then I've questioned how much you really want to vote to begin with, right? And so you have that portion of the bill that is being called a racist, even though I don't see how it can be viewed as racist. The other portion, which is giving away food and drink to voters waiting in lines, right? So basically, Republicans are arguing that the reason why they want to get rid of this is because it can be viewed by some in line that the individuals passing out food and drinks, they're doing so with like a wink wink on you know who to vote for. Now that sounds ridiculous, but one of the things that did take place as part of this last presidential election is there was a lot of people telling people how to vote from weird places. I'm talking about preachers, pastors, family, of course, co-workers, bosses. Like there was a lot of individuals telling people, hey, make sure you go and vote for Joe Biden without telling people, hey, go vote for Joe Biden. And so when Republicans make the argument that, hey, we don't want people passing out food and drinks on these lines because they're kind of coercing people to vote a particular way, that is not a crazy thing, to say, from the right side of the aisle, at least from my perspective. Now, that said, what people on the left would say is, well, look, these lines are long. People are going to be waiting in line for a long time. Many of the time, they're hungry. People get hungry. They get thirsty. And so by passing out food and drinks to these people, we can ensure that they're more likely to stay in line instead of saying, you know what, F it. This is taking too long. I'm going to take my behind home and go get something to eat and drink because this line's taking forever. I understand that side of the issue as well. And so if I'm being honest, the Republicans are passing this part of the bill because they know that they're going to have these long lines. And this is where I think Republicans have to kind of own this, which is they purposely in certain areas within the state, black areas, they have long lines to dissuade people from standing online. And so that, you know what, this line's too long, I'll go ahead and leave. And so the food and drink portion, if you take that away, you increase the likelihood that if someone is standing on a long line, now they're hungry, now they're thirsty, they are going to leave because, who really cares as much about this election? My vote is not going to matter that much. And Republicans have to own this, right? Y'all have to kind of own that this is kind of how y'all playing because you guys cannot win elections fair and square anymore. So Republicans haven't won, I don't think, the majority of Americans in a presidential election since what, maybe Daddy Bush, right? Like whenever Republicans do win the presidency, they're winning with like 46% of the country as far as the popular vote. They're not winning these raw numbers. So even within certain states now, they need to depress voters from the other side of the aisle so that they can win instead of maxing out their own votes, which I think is actually anti-democratic, but it kind of is what it is. Republicans do that. Democrats don't do that, but it's not because Democrats are morally superior to Republicans. It's just because, generally speaking, most African Americans vote Democrat. And so for Democrats, what they want to do is they want to expand voting access to people because it benefits them, especially if we're talking about areas where there is a high concentration of black people. And so they're not morally superior. They're doing what is in their best interest, the same way Republicans are doing what's in their best interest. Because with Democrats, if you notice, they may not vote to suppress to the degree that Republicans do. But what they do, though, is they keep other people off of the ballots. I mean, other parties off of the ballots. So like the Green Party, the Libertarian Party, the DNC works very, very hard to keep third parties off of ballots in states. And that's how they vote to suppress. Right now, they also work in conjunction with Republicans, but still, that's what Democrats are doing. And so, Major League Baseball moving the All-Star game out of Georgia, that doesn't make sense to me. Nothing I read sounded like, hey, this is innately racist, because all of these would apply to white Americans as well. And so when you compare it to Jim Crow, you kind of have to be careful because the Jim Crow stuff was implemented and it was only hurting African Americans, generally speaking, right? Now, maybe there was some hurt on the white side as well, but it was targeted towards African Americans, right? And that's why when using language like, this is Jim Crow 2.0, etc., I think we have to kind of be very, very careful because all of this stuff is going to apply to white people as well. The drop boxes and the ID for voting and, you can't eat and drink in line, right? This applies to everyone in the state. This is not just applying to African Americans. Okay. So I don't view this as racist policy, even though Republicans are doing this to keep black people from voting, but those two things are not one and the same. A racist policy has to be racist innately, meaning the policy in and of itself is racist. This is not that. Do I like it? I mean, some of it I do. Like the ID to vote, I actually think is a good thing. And in this case, it's not even to vote. It's just if you're requesting a ballot and you don't fall into like special categories, like, over 65, overseas. If you're a regular person, you can still request a mail-in ballot, but you have to send some form of identification. I don't view that as racist. I just don't. Because when you're coming into a polling place, I can see who you are. I see you. I know you are you. You're coming into the polling place. But on a mail-in ballot, I don't know who's filling out the mail-in ballot. Who knows? And so, requiring some form of identification actually is I think, a pretty good standard to have if we are going to move forward with all these individuals requesting mail-in ballots in the future. Now, I personally don't think that's the case because I think, the past presidential election was a very specific scenario because we had COVID going on. And so with COVID, people were a lot more hesitant to go to the polls because people didn't want to catch COVID. And so I don't think we're going to have these record number of people voting by mail-in ballots in the future. But if we do, then yes, we have to kind of secure, these votes and make sure that the people that are mailing these back in are actually those people. I can easily see a scenario where, somebody's mom or dad or wife is filling out their mail-in ballot for them and sending it in. And we don't want that because that is election fraud. So, yeah, like I said, I don't view this as innately racist policy, even though the goal of this is to, make it more of a pain in the you-know-what for African Americans in particular to vote. But my thing is, if you're African American, get an ID, right? Expect to wait in lines for a long time. Hell, bring your own food and snack if lines going to be that long. Is this playing dirty on the parts of Republicans? Absolutely. But calling this Jim Crow 2.0, I think is ridiculous. So that's kind of where I want to end here. Thank you guys for listening. This is kind of my first live stream for real on my YouTube channel and Periscope and whatnot. So let me know how you feel about what I have to say down in the comments below. We'd love to hear your thoughts and opinions. But yeah, I will see you guys next time. Deuces.